day or the last official day of the Congress, and I'm glad to see that so many are still here with us. And it's time for our keynotes, our last keynotes. And first is my friend and colleague, the President-elect of TICCIH, Marion Steiner, and she's going to talk about connecting people and places, industrial heritage for peace. Give her a round of applause.
Thank you, people. Thank you, Roine. Thank you, the organizers, for having me here and for this wonderful invitation after a year to be back in Kiruna and its surroundings, places and people. It's a pleasure, you know that, so I just start talking. Preparing for this speech, which is part of the 50th anniversary Congress of TICCIH, it's interesting and sentimental to state that myself, I also celebrated my 50th birthday this year, so that makes it kind of interesting to be as old as TICCIH. And probably TICCIH will survive me. I brought a presentation which is recycled from the opening speech I gave last year at the TICCIH Brazil Congress, so in August 2024, which is pretty much coinciding with what I have been asked to talk here about what are the current discussion points and new themes coming up within TICCIH and what are perspectives for the future. But it is also interesting to see that a year later, only a year later, I should have done it anew, because we have been working a lot and so many things are already out of date. You will see that in the presentation. I have some things in from last year and I put some last minute things in from this year. So it was a really speedy year. You will see also how much I have been immersed in the fields, different fields over the past years. Let's say the past 6 years that I have had the honor to work for TICCIH as its Secretary General. There's a lot of networking. There is a lot of living with local communities, with nice people who we like each other and who we want to understand each other. But despite of the effort of active listening, there always remains the unknowable. And that is a dimension I think that is very important to keep in our hearts and minds when we are talking about TICCIH going global, because we will never fully understand what is happening in other places and what is going on in the minds of other people. That's like my main conclusion after having made the effort of living in Chile continuously now for 7 years. Great friends and still so much to understand. So key points in this speech are some ideas I have been developing over the last years with dear colleagues in the fields about thinking industrial heritage. As we know, it comes from a European origin. I will go into that in more detail. There are critiques ever since the beginning. TICCIH exists and also the Nizhny-Tagil exists. There's a necessity of more situated approaches. And there's also an opportunity to reconnect TICCIH and global industrial heritage to UNESCO's founding mission, which consists in building peace in the minds of women and men. I have a second part where I want to talk about making industrial heritage from the grounds, which is precisely the fact that there is no universal industrial heritage. Everything depends on contexts and people and places. Nonetheless, it is possible to connect and to interconnect, and there are interesting concepts to take in account, and where I have been gradually learning a lot from my dear colleagues Pamela Fuentes and Auliki Balak from Valparaiso, Chile, from Esperanza, also from Chile, but from the south, and from Molshe from India. I will explain that in more detail when I show you all the pictures. And the third part is a little bit shorter, because we will come back to that later this afternoon in the General Assembly. So I'll keep talking just through the whole day today. Just to mention you how important collaborative and decolonial ways have become in recent years within the TICCIH community, how important the role of communities and arts has become, and some words about Kiruna as a place that offers great intellectual and methodological opportunities to discuss these things further, even when we are not here anymore. So, to start, industrial heritage started as a European concept. It was born in times of economic, social, and cultural crises back then. Let's say in the 60s, 70s, 80s, depends on how you take it. I normally in the German context cite Hermann Glaser, Industrie, Kultur und Alltagsleben, but of course I wanted, after the keynote from Mats, include Dig Where You Stand, which is the Swedish counterpart, and even a little bit earlier, I guess. So this started in that generation as an enlightening mission, as a beautiful enlightening mission, aiming towards self-awareness and critical reflection, as we being part of an industrial and industrialized society. There are these sympathetic old men that are dying out as of now, so generational change is of course a very important issue. And it's nice to see them still standing. When talking about industrial heritage in different contexts, as I do, in different countries and continents also, I always make the point that the interesting thing is that industrial heritage succeeds in connecting very different fields or spheres. So academia is very important, and it's basic that it needs to be inter- and transdisciplinary. Public administration is crucial. There is a need for intersectoral policies. Local communities, the NGOs and civil society should be at the heart of it, and some role could also be played by companies, industrial companies. So we're really in a great array of chaotic voices from archaeology, history, architecture, engineering, geography, sociology, ethnology, and many more. We deal with economic development, urbanism, transport, culture, politics, tourism, and many more. And there are a lot of actors in the field that sometimes have the voices and sometimes their voices get omitted, like associations of former workers, to quote the most classical ones, or environmentalists, and so on. TICCIH has been born from that in Europe as an international organization with delegates from many different European and some other countries. So the first Congress was celebrated in 1973 in Ironbridge, as you all know. It was back then called the First International Congress on the Conservation of Industrial Monuments. Then the second happened in Bochum, Germany, shortly after I have been born, just kilometers from there. And the third took then place in Stockholm just 3 years later. And only then it came into being as TICCIH, the International Committee for the Conservation of Industrial Heritage, and not monuments, which is interesting to quote at that date. Major It was so nice with the reindeers yesterday. I need some water. The Nisni-Tagelkarte for Industrial Heritage is a major document that had been set up by former TICCIH President Eusebi Casanels and was published in 2003, which connects identification issues with management issues and interpretation. You all know that. There's also the TICCIH Handbook, published in 2012, that does more or less the same. But we can quote and state for both of them that important parts are missing, and then there are many blind fields. So what is interesting to say is that in the same context of time where the handbook, which was mainly contributions from Europe, was published, at the same time there were discussions ongoing in Asia, for example. So we have the Seoul Declaration on Industrial Heritage in Asia by Man, and we also have the Taipei Declaration for Asian Industrial Heritage, which was signed in 2012 in the context of the TICCIH World Congress in Taiwan, which was the first ever in Asia. And the issue here, and that is like what I will be telling ever more in the minutes to come, is about claiming respect for diversity we have on planet Earth, and that there are some perspectives that are not yet, or that are not included in the Nisni-Tagelkarte, and that should be included in a new TICCIH Charter. We will be talking about that in the General Assembly and in the closing panel. So actually what we are doing in the recent years, I would say like the recent 5 years, is that we can see that TICCIH is gradually transforming from an international organization to a global community. When we look precisely at the last congresses, I have said already, Taiwan 2012 was the first global congress in Asia. We had the first Latin American World Congress in Chile in 2018. That was just the year when I moved there. We had important discussions about northern, southern, eastern, western perspectives and differences in Montreal 3 years ago at Lucy's Congress. And we had this year in Kiruna and Lapland, a little bit beyond national borders, in Sami and Tornedalian territories, even a greater push towards topics that are not at all classical in TICCIH history. So to tell a little bit more about the importance of places to connect on a global scale and between people, I just rush through an array of nice pictures to show you a little bit what I have been working on in the past years. That is not to tell you that all the wonderful work I'm doing. That is more or less to take this as an example for many other people who are doing the same efforts in many other places. This selection is because I can talk about them. Well, because I know the people and I have been involved and I know what to say about this. There are a lot of places that I don't know. I have still a lot to learn. But let's start. So El Sauce y la Luz, that's a water power station complex built by Berlin actors in the hinterlands of Valparaiso, actually served to give light to the global port city of Valparaiso on the western Pacific coast of Chile. And this is where we started to work on that same place, which is this place. We have the machine hall, we have the water reservoir, the same place, but different perspectives. It looks like a natural landscape. Of course, it isn't. It's in the outskirts of the city, so that is a different perspective also from the urban peripheries. And so the first things that we started to do in Valparaiso with Pamela when I arrived and worked at the university were to prepare these information sheets of the places that are part of the water power system in Valparaiso and that in fact belong or are part of the electric heritage of Berlin. So the effort was to connect across the globe two places. And also to make the point about you can talk very differently about what these places mean. You can interpret that as a major contribution of German technology to local development, or you can say that Germans are the latest that arrive in the early 20th century to dominate the electricity sector in Chile, in a place where already the copper industry is dominated by the typical US American guy, and the saltpeter business is dominated by the typical Englishman. So very different ways of talking and telling, talking about the same thing and telling very different stories. My major motivation to move to Valparaiso was, of course, to promote the content of my PhD research on all these German electrification things in central Chile, but also the existence of the small community museum, where its director, still standing museum also, Pamela, became a very good friend, and we really had the feeling that we should be working together, and that just coincided with me getting a professorship there, and we had the opportunity to do that for 4 years. In that time, the museum grew and established itself. Pamela did a lot of oral history with local people who worked and lived in these places built by Germans over generations. That was very nice to complement between the two of us. We wrote a book together in Spanish, of course, that includes the local stories of the people, not only my German imperial history. And we had the possibility through the research project with which I'm funding the travels of my colleagues to Kiruna to also have people visiting the places on the spot. So here you can see, for example, Humberto from Mexico, who is a great expert in water power, or Miguel Ángel Álvarez Areces, who is the president of Incuna, and of course Moultrie and Sudi, two architects from New Delhi. We continued to push the center of power in Berlin to include these places in their interpretation strategy. That's very conflictive, because what we tell is not the nice story about Germans helping others to develop, more the contrary. So it's not evident, but with whom we connect well in Berlin are sometimes local initiatives that strive for survival in the outskirts of Berlin, which is precisely where the factories of AEG have been located. So it's a story of sharing heritage across continents with a joint mission to make a value out of this and a sense out of this. And it is also a fight for justice on the ground in the context of Valparaiso. And I would have to actualize, to update this, because Pamela made a beautiful presentation the other day. So I have to change all my slides. And instead of doing that, I just included a photo of her presenting yesterday. And now hop on to another place where another beautiful people are working on and developed concepts that I learned a lot from, which is the case of the southern Chile territories, which is a beautiful landscape, very similar to Laponia, and invaded by industrial processes. Very interesting comparative case. In times of colonization to the south and with underground mining below the Pacific Ocean. Esperanza told about that during the Congress and also in the municipal library the other day. So these are the pictures. And here the point I would like to make, Esperanza makes other points, is that there is a resistance against official narratives where people also feel that the stories that are in the tourist interpretations are not the stories they would like to tell. So there's a resistance and a critique against the official stories, and a movement to tell the stories the way they should be, including what we call like dark sides of heritage. So the concepts of insurgent heritage or radical nostalgia were very interesting for me to learn from. There is even a World Heritage Initiative in Lota ongoing. It's already on the national tentative list in Chile. And in the Congress, Esperanza was talking about during the Congress that we organized, when I helped her organizing. She did it in 2023. We had the opportunity to bring people there and learn and get in touch with the local citizens table for heritage and tourism, who's pushing forward this bid. So including also subjects that are not that comfortable, like violence against women, and telling the darker sides and the full story of the place to UNESCO, because it's a universal story. Some pictures from the Congress, which was beautifully intertwined with an art festival, connected not only by place but also by the stories with the content of the different sessions of the Congress. That worked beautifully. I still can't believe that until this day. It was more than 100 local artists and artisans participating actively in this week of Congress. And they also made money out of that. So people bought nice things. Perhaps, for example, my bag that is up there that you saw me carrying over the week is made by Manos de Lota. Make a little bit promotion. There's this book, have a look. It's completely bilingual, where we explain how this has been working. Thank you, Mirhan, for producing this wonderful QR code, Esperanza, and I never knew how to do that, so that's done in a second. We did that just this morning. And as a conclusion, update part from this experience, I'm still living with Esperanza and the people in Lota and the connected issues. I was very impressed by what she mentioned in one slide in the library speech she gave 2 days ago, that actually we should start to change our questions and to say and to ask not what would be the traditional questions, what, how, and for whom are we doing this, but to ask who, how, and for what does what. I thought that was like, ooh, okay, I put it here, still thinking about it. And the third place I would like to take you to, I've never been there yet, is where Mulshree is working on since so many years and decades now, which is Bhopal, and where I learned a lot about concepts I didn't know before, thanks to her and her work about toxic heritage, care and repair, and healing, and the need for networks, global networks of care. I will not explain the case of Bhopal because Mulshree does that so much better. Here are the pictures. You can imagine what it is about. I put some drawings in made by Mulshree also when she started or was in the beginnings of analyzing the situation on the grounds, so mapping pollution. And of course, there is a great movement for justice and the international campaign for justice. It's now more than 40 years ago, and the place is still a disaster. So impressive work that has been done by Moultrie and her team at Space Matters about mapping this and about proposing new kinds of landscape architecture and how to deal with waste. This is also something I not mention further here speaking. They made a great book together with Scandinavian colleagues, which is very impressive, connecting with other places around the world that also tell very dark stories about mankind. And the other day she gave a speech that is again mind-blowing, because I thought I had understood everything, and now she comes up with a whole new dimension, proposing to discuss this case from a theoretical UNESCO interpretation perspective, and I will not comment on that further, just leave it open. So perhaps in the closing panel, we can talk more about this. That's also a little bit the strategic idea behind this. Like, I'm better at questions, and answers are like very, very fast. They are over, and then and good questions take you to better questions, but answers are always like the horizon that moves away. So from these three cases, or let's say places and people involved, one can draw some interesting points of reflection. This is what I put last year. That's like, yeah, still true. It's action research approaches, of course, so research at the service of society and communities. We can see that more than material conservation, this is about the reflection about processes and power imbalances that are behind these industrialization processes. There's a certain issue of heritage imperialism that is very interesting. That's a word for the closing panel. There is a felt need to deconstruct the colonial paradigm. There are so many beautiful sentences when Moultrie puts herself together and starts to write. This is one of the, the strongest kinds of writing I know. So I just quoted two things of her here that have been published in a journal just recently. And when we look at these three places and the people involved I was presenting here, we can also see how important it is to have women on the spot. So I think it is not a coincidence that these three cases, all the people that are doing the heritage work are women, a kind of heritage care workers, being paid nothing or very little, being thrown out of universities after having done wonderful jobs. So this talks really about extractivist systems that are in place, not only in the mining, but also in everything that you can imagine that defines your local or global societies, like the academic system, like public systems of how to separate disciplines or policy sectors. There are also on the meta level, theoretical discussions about that. So I just mentioned discard studies or waste studies, which are concepts I learned from Moultrie, but that are actually from Canada, from Max Liboiron. Very interesting work over there. And the other day, Esperanza mentioned like it's also about a lot of narrativa cansada. I didn't know how to explain that, how to put that in English. Where it's like, we're tired to tell the story, but of course we go on. So all that, the details are in this book chapter. Stefan Berger insisted on me to write. It took me 2 years, but then when I was the final one to owe him my text. I did it. I wrote it up. Well, if you can see, the main subchapter titles is what I put in the PowerPoint. So thinking industrial heritage from the thousands is about heritage and human rights, industrial heritage and decolonization, TICCIH and its global scope. I also wanted to talk about TICCIH and UNESCO and the future of TICCIH when we are going truly global. And I put you this QR scan because from my research project, I paid a hell of a lot of money to have this open access, to have it available for all, not only to super duper academic institutions who can afford to yearly pay subscriptions to Routledge. And then moving beyond, that's I have no clue about what time it is. I hope I'm doing fine. This is the final words that lead over to the General Assembly this afternoon. So moving beyond TICCIH in the 21st century, changes are necessary. And I already said that 3 years ago in Montreal in the session we chaired with Doug. We need to rethink theory, methodology, we need to rethink criteria, evaluation criteria, but also UNESCO criteria. I believe we need to change narrative. We have heard a lot about that during the Congress. And we can also do a lot more about communication formats and tools that fits to the needs. One project TICCIH has been working on in the past that goes within this philosophy is what we have been working on from Latin America, which is this project of collaborative mapping of industrial heritage in Latin America and the Caribbean. I will not comment on that further, but perhaps Guy later in the closing panel can talk about that more, because he's actually the coordinator of the project and on the new board in charge of leading the reflection on how can we build as TICCIH a sustainable strategy for implementing and creating and proposing projects that we need for our community. Kiruna as a place is super fascinating as a screen from which we can reflect on many things in all kinds of ways possible. Where here we are really faced with the planetary dimension of extractivist dynamics. And we talked about that even in the library the other day, of how comparable it is with some situations and how incomparable it is with others. And that was a moment where me personally, I noted also that I have my Chilean height and think about houses that just are not neatly packed up and then you have a park, but that just scramble into a hole. I know also that Guy from Brazil is here with his little son, and he had nightmares after the city tours of him falling into a deep hole. So that is a human thing that is happening in this context that is also interesting. But on the same time, I was thinking about the town where I grew up in, which is the only new town the Ruhr region ever built. And there are quite some interesting connecting points that I will think about further. It was beautiful to have the two lectures from Esperanza from Chile and from Guy from Brazil, who are actually both now at the Ruhr University in Bochum at the Institute for Social Movements, with different kinds of fellows. So Esperanza, Alexander von Humboldt Foundation Fellow, and Guy, Marie Curie Fellow. And they talked about things like different values. That's why I put this slide of Esperanza speaking, where you have the same thing, but depending on who you are and what context you are in, it is a completely different thing, a different person, completely different story. And Guy, who talked a lot about power dynamics and the need of horizontal relations and the role of emotions in the whole thing of that. And it's also for that I mentioned the nightmare of his son. And then we had these beautiful regional meetings. Well, not all the regional meetings were beautiful, I know that, but I've had but I have been to the Asia-Pacific meeting because we were, you might have noticed that on Monday we signed a memorandum of understanding between TICCIH and ANI, and I have been working on that for months with my beautiful colleagues in in China and in Taiwan and in Taipei. And we have had beautiful discussions over the last months also with colleagues from Japan and from Korea, and it was a wonderful meeting where we started to talk about things. And now we have a WhatsApp group, and we will have an email group, and Mulshui and Xiao Wei can talk a little bit more about that in the afternoon. Yiping will leave at noon, so that's a pity. I would really have liked to talk to her much more, as with many of you. That's just so many people, even if it's a week time. And the Americas also. So these photographs, I put them to let you know that the new strategy or renewed strategy or whatever you want to call it of TICCIH is really about building world regions groups. We are a little bit tired of national borders and national stories and national superlativisms and the logic that is finally also behind UNESCO and what you need to defend when you put forward a World Heritage nomination. You always end up in a national context that restricts the story that is global to something that is truly global and that connects people and places in a way that I believe no other kind of heritage can do, because industrial heritage is global. We have I forgot about this. We already had a change, an important change 3 years ago. This afternoon we will do another important step for moving forward. And I was thinking about that. I somehow managed to neatly make the connection. This is my colleague Auliki talking also yesterday, a beautiful speech that she did. And she ended with this galactarian, how do you call it? Galactic narrative of saying, she's working at the Institute of Astronomy at the University of Valparaiso as a science communicator. So she started saying, this is galaxies, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And it's through these kind of things that minerals like copper or whatever have come to planet Earth. And her second slide was showing the door of some kind of thing that has to do with brewing beer in Limache, Chile, but what actually has been fabricated in 1895 in Berlin-Charlottenburg. As I know that you will probably not be able to read this, I can read this. So the copper or iron comes from the galaxies, and this is the same iron that was extracted in the 19th century in Kiruna and were exported to Berlin, where the door of the germination drum, that's the technical term for this thing, was built, essential for proper barley malting. The boiler ran on coal brought from Lota to the port of Valparaiso and then transported by train to Limache. Industrialization processes are global. We are all connected. I found that so beautiful. Thank you, Auliki. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion. Here is a small present for you, and I think we have time for a few questions. Please raise your hands. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Please raise your hands if you have any questions. Okay, great. Let's take a 7-minute break before Lucy's keynote. Get up on the seats, move around a little bit, and don't forget to buy t-shirts. You remember? Limited editions, great value. And you're helping us organizers with, yeah. Thank you very much.